Good morning, everyone. The gospel reading, Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. Once while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and they were washing their nets. So he got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and he asked him, "Put out a little way from the shore." Then he sat down and he taught the crowds from the boat. And when he'd finished speaking, he said to Simon, Now put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we've worked all night long, but we've caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they'd done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw all this, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you'll be catching people." When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and they followed him. The word of the Lord. Yesterday, I had the privilege of being with the leadership of this church, deacons and elders and staff, and I got them sharing stories. One elder told me midway through the morning that when he left home, he told his wife, "This is going to be a waste of time." See what I'm up against? And so I got him in small groups, and I said, "Remember a place you loved when you were little. Just for a few minutes, just tell about that place." And the spell and the memory and the remembrances of little treasured spaces showed up, and they told the stories. My grandmother had an apple orchard. There was a creek where we used to go fishing. There was a cubby under the stairs where I had books and a little light. And you felt the energy rise in the group. I said, "Okay, now let's mix it up. New groups. Remember a crush, your first crush when you were young." And one gentleman raised his hand and said, "Are these groups going to be confidential?" It's possible my crush is still in this room right here. And so they got in the circles, some people turning red-faced as they told about the crush they had 50 years ago. And they remembered the ache in the heart and that yearning and that disorientation. And they told the stories, and there was laughter and embarrassment and sometimes tears at what had been lost. Then we mixed them up again. We got in groups. Tell me a time. I said, in your groups, tell a time when you received compassion or kindness. Just a moment when someone was kind to you. People got quiet and reflective, and then they started talking. I was 18 years old. I didn't know what I was going to do. And some teacher pulled me aside and said, "Hey, what's going on? I want to hear what's happening." I had a grandmother who saw me after our mother died, and she took me on a walk. There was a stranger on a bus, and I didn't know what I should do after I'd lost my job, and he started asking me questions, and he was kind to me. And then we did one more last circle. We got him in different groups, and I said, if I could give you a photo album and you had all the pictures of your life in there, which images would stand out as a sacred moment, a sacred moment? And we had a little silence, and people waited for the Holy Spirit to bring them these images, and then they told them to one another. It was right after the funeral, my siblings and I got together back in the old house. It was our firstborn. It was just my husband and me in the room holding that little baby. It was a time where I got up early and I watched the sunrise right after I'd finally broken the addiction. It was just a little moment. I thought it was ridiculous, actually. It was just me in the backyard with my coffee, and I was looking at the trees, and I felt a presence. And they shared these moments, and when they were done, I said, what was it like to share like this? And one gentleman said, it was the deep speaking to the deep. You know, this isn't all there is. This isn't all there is. What we've been striving for, what we've been working for, that survival system that we've created, the work and the chores and the personas and the performing who we are in front of one another, it's not all there is. There's a deep in you. And when I asked the people yesterday, so you said this was a sacred moment, what was that sacred presence like? Just give me a word. And we wrote them on the board, and they said words like, it was an unending peace. It was stillness. It was reassurance. That presence was like deep acceptance. There was joy. There was grace. There was this overwhelming wonder. There was awe. There was truth. It was like being in truth. And there was love. And the deep spoke in that room. The same deep that's in everyone in this room now. My daughter was 5 years old. We went to visit a family friend who had a little girl, 5 years old, Sutton. They were friends. Our daughters were playing in the backyard. I was with Eric, my friend there, and we were in charge of watching our daughters. Eric has a backyard that is a rail fence. On the other side of the rail fence is 100 acres of meadow, and on the back side of that meadow, there's black oak trees along a creek. And we were sitting drinking iced tea in the afternoon. Our daughters are playing. Our wives were making lunch when my wife Jill poked her head out from the kitchen and said, "Hey, how are the girls doing?" And we looked. We had not been paying attention to what the girls were doing. And there, on the other side of the rail fence, was my daughter and my friend's daughter. They were each atop a horse. And the horses were riding across the meadow. Now, we don't have horses. And my friend doesn't have horses either. So this was quite alarming. So I immediately turned to my wife and said, "They're fine, go back inside." And then my friend and I hopped the rail fence and went tearing across that meadow. And as we're getting closer, we could see in the shadows of the black oak trees there by the creek, there was a woman with a cowboy hat and belt buckle and Wrangler jeans with a horse trailer back there, and she came out from the shadow and said, it's okay, they're safe. And we came up there sort of out of breath, and I'm like, what's going on here? And she says, well, they're very safe. And if you looked, and we could see in the meadow, somebody had mowed a path that the horses were following, that the girls were riding on. And she said, well, I'm a horse therapist. And I said, a horse therapist? Yeah, I'm a therapist to horses. She said, what happens is people decide to buy a pony for their kids. And they get one for Christmas or something like this, but they've never taken care of an animal. And so they put it in the garage, or they put it in a shed, and they're intending to build a fenced area or intending to build a barn, and then they don't do it. And the horse lives in the dark there, in the garage, feeding whatever oats they have and drinking tepid water that they have in a pail there, and they're abused this way, just living there. Sometimes a horse will live for 2 years in this kind of state until a neighbor finds out and calls us, or they sell the house, or there's a divorce, and they call me. I said, what happens then? She says, I have to get the horse out of that enclosure. And so I usually have to get 2 men with me. We bring the trailer up because the horse doesn't want to leave. It's all it knows. And so we have to drag the animal while it whines until we can push it into that trailer, which it doesn't want to go into. And then I drive it out to this meadow that I've been given permission to use. And we push the horse out of the trailer, which it doesn't want to leave. And then it starts to cry. So what do you mean? She said, well, it doesn't recognize grass as food. It doesn't recognize the creek as water. It's used to this musty, metallic smell sometimes. It's used to the dry oats. And so it cries because it's hungry, and it cries because it's thirsty. And so she said, I set up a tent, and I wait. And I wait. And I wait sometimes a whole day and night until the horse goes over in desperation into that water, puts its nuzzle down in there and begins to drink and thinks, oh, this is water. And then maybe another day goes by, hungry, starving, desperate, and then pulls up the grass and realizes this is food. And she said, it's at that moment that I received the greatest pleasure and the purpose for this work. I said, what happens? She said, once it realizes it's in a field of food and water, it takes off running. And it runs around and around this field, jumping and running, filled with joy that it's free. Now we know this story. We know this story. We want so badly to manufacture our own freedom. We want to engineer our own transformation. We'd like to get a little bit of God, but not enough to disrupt our lives. We would like the garage just to be remodeled a bit. Maybe a little light, maybe a little front room. But don't take me out of here. I don't want the freedom that Jesus offers. I'd like to stay on the edge of the water, let him sit in the boat, let him tell me all the beautiful things, but don't invite me out into the deep. It's too disruptive. A few nights ago, I sat with a woman who's very accomplished. We were out to dinner. She's worked in an industry that's mostly men. She's kept herself intact and became very successful in this industry. She's done a lot of good for her community. She said, I'm 52 years old and I am still driven. I have accomplished everything I wanted. I've got all the material needs I've ever wanted, and the drive in me won't stop. And I said to her, well, if I could find a way to free and heal you, do you want to be free? And it was a tearful silence. And she couldn't even say it. She said, you know my answer. It was no. Because I'd have to give up everything. It was that same terror that Peter felt when he realized what Jesus was offering. I'm a sinful man. I can't do this. I don't know how to surrender. I know how to win. I know how to control things. I know how to succeed. I don't know how to give up. And it's almost like we find ourselves living in a prison. Some of us nicer selves than others, but we're in the prison system. And one day, Jesus comes into that prison and says to us, let's get out of here. Let's not live like this anymore. And we think, well, you know, it's pot roast Thursday, and it's pretty good in the prison cafeteria. And actually, I'm part of a ministry team in the prison chapel. You would love this, Jesus. We're doing a whole thing on freedom. We're singing old gospels, and we're talking about what happened in Egypt. And when I get done with that series, maybe. And then every once in a while, just in the middle of your own soul, you hear a whisper that's very terrifying that Jesus says to us. He says, you know this prison you're living in, these systems and all the ways you've contained yourself? The prison isn't even real. It doesn't even exist. So let's just walk. And that's when we feel the same thing Peter felt in the boat. Don't tell me this prison isn't real. I've based my life on this system. You know how many years I've given to this system to figure it out, to know how to be safe, to know how to survive, to take care of my family. Don't tell me this prison system isn't real. I know who the winners are, the losers are. I know who's safe. I know who's my enemy. Don't tell me this isn't real. Do you want to be free? Do you want to go out into the deep to feel what we felt yesterday, the stillness, the peace, the joy, the happiness? All the things that every one of us has touched in little moments when God came to us, in the sacred moments of our life. Do we want to trust them? Or do we want to stay where we are? That's the question. I want to close with this image. I was at a graduation ceremony. A woman was sitting next to me, and we were kind of away from the hubbub at the party afterwards. She said, all my suffering is around graduations. I can't believe I even came to this. And I said, really, what? What's the story? And she told me the story and has given me permission to tell it. She says, when I was a child, my parents were both alcoholics. Only child. We lived in an upper middle class area. Nobody really knew. They were high functioning. They both had successful careers. But the curtains were drawn. The house was dark. Often there wasn't enough food in the house. And if you look at pictures of me growing up, you can tell no one's caring for me. I look unkempt, uncared for. And so I was very isolated. I didn't have friends. I was kind of absorbed in this pain. I just walked to school on my own. I stayed to myself in school. But in 6th grade, I noticed something. And that was, I was smart. I was smart. I knew what the teachers were talking about. I could do the math. I could do the science. I liked to read. And I just poured myself into school. I went to high school. I still didn't have friends, but I did well. And when that high school graduation showed up, I was so excited because I thought, I'm finally going to be seen for my gifts, even though I was just kind of the weird, introverted, quiet kid. She says, at that graduation, you got to wear a gold cord if you had one of the highest GPAs. And I put that gold cord over my robe and went into the auditorium and sat in that service. She said, my parents were so out of it. My mother didn't even come to the graduation. It was just my dad with a drinking buddy standing in the back. I sat in that auditorium up on the stage, and then the principal gave this terrible announcement. The principal said, listen, we got a lot of people here. It's a long ceremony. So what we're going to do is we're going to call the names of people to get their diplomas, but when the names are called, we're not going to applaud. We're going to wait till all the names and all the diplomas are given. Then we'll all stand and applaud together. That'll speed things up. So the reason this was a terrible instruction is that no one obeyed it. So a name would be called, and a few people would stand, or sometimes other students would yell or say something, and I got this sick feeling. Because I knew when they called my name, it would be silent. And so I sat there just focusing on my dad. Just, come on, Dad, do something, make some kind of noise. But instead, they called my name, and I stood and I walked across that stage in silence and in shame. And when the ceremony ended, I walked outside, I threw the cord away, I threw my diploma away, put the robe away, and I just walked home crying. I went to college, I did well in college, I skipped my college graduation. I went to law school, went to my law school graduation, And suddenly the memory came back, and I got afraid. And I found some young people there in the auditorium, and I walked to them and said, hey, this is my name in the program here. When they call that name, would you guys cheer? And I paid them each $5. Now, this is an accomplished woman, right? She's getting a law degree. And she's paying strangers to cheer for her because she doesn't feel like there's anybody there for her, right? She said, you wouldn't believe it. I'm sitting in the auditorium. The dean makes the same announcement. We're not going to cheer for anybody. We're going to wait till everybody gets their degree. And for the second time in my life, when my name was called, I walked across a stage in silence. The young people I'd paid weren't paying attention, didn't cheer, no one made a noise, and that night I started to drink. And I lost 10 years. Women's shelters, living in cars, staying with relatives, couldn't pull myself together. Just the pain and hurt of my life. Until I went to an AA meeting, I started to come back together. I got a job as a legal secretary. I met someone. I got married, and she said, last year I had my very first birthday party. So my husband is a sound engineer, and he put this birthday party together, invited people from the apartment building and from our recovery groups and from work. And I'd never had a party, so it was pin the tail on the donkey and little hats and a children's cake and all this stuff, and it was so fun. And then all of a sudden, he had all of us sit around the television, and up on the screen comes this, he puts in this DVD, and it's this little kind of tribute to me. People talking about what they like about me, and music playing, and photos of me, and all of a sudden, at the end of the video, up comes my law school graduation. It's a scene from this graduation. It's just the moment where they're calling my name. And I watch on this screen this young woman walk across the stage, except because my husband's a sound engineer. He had gone to an auditorium and he had recorded himself sitting in different parts of the auditorium cheering. Way to go, Martha. That's it, Martha. You know, clapping, cheering, and then he looped it together, edited it together, so that this time, when I was walking across the stage, there erupts all of this applause and my name and voices, and all this is happening on the video. And shit, it was one of those things where before I knew what I was doing, I said, turn it off. Wait a minute, turn that off. That's not how it happened. And I ran forward and I turned off the television set. And it was awkward, and I went into my room, and I just fell to pieces. All that memory, all that pain coming over me. And when my husband came into the room, I said, I can't believe you showed that. You have any idea what happened to me? You just show it to strangers like that? And he asked everyone to leave. And I just sat in awe of the work I had been doing to free myself from the burden I had been given as a child. And then about 3 a.m, I got up, and I don't know what it was. I came into the room. My husband was there on the couch. He didn't say anything, just got up. And I went to the television, and I put that DVD back in. And I fast-forwarded it to that place in that graduation ceremony. And I watched. And this time, I heard my husband in 100 voices saying to me, I love you, I love you, I love you. This is the call. This is the call. And when we're willing to just trust a little, just turn in the direction of that love and let all the pain and the struggle fall away, we find ourselves free. Free. Amen.